Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our co-host and analyst. He is a blogger for the Daily Norseman, along with other blogs around the internet. And overall, useful human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing this fantastic Tuesday night?
I'm doing pretty great. I'm really stoked that the useful human title has lasted more than a couple of episodes. So
we're forcing this down the public's throat. I feel like you can add this to your Twitter profile now. That you are now listed as a useful human via the Norse Code podcast.
Yeah, no, that's I think I should do that.
I think it has to be added now. Welcome to the show. We have all sorts of things to talk about. We are just going to review the game for the Packers game. We have a great mailbag to go over as well. The next episode, we will go over our playoff preview special, including the game that's coming up on Sunday against the Seahawks at home, which is also the first time a replacement stadium has hosted an NFL playoff game, which I think that's kind of amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Like, of all randomness.
Although I do know that because I remember going into TCF at the end of the 2013 season, beginning of 2014 season. I remember there were a bunch of stats about temporary stadiums. Now, teams tended to do pretty poorly in them, so that actually does make a lot of sense. But still, that's nuts.
Yeah, we get one more game at least in at the bank, so that's kind of cool. But we have all sorts of things to talk about, and before we get into the review of the Packers game and how we are now the kings of the NFC North, just a little listener support promo. Just letting you guys know, if you like the show, if you find value in what you're hearing or what you interact with on Twitter, if you feel like throwing us a buck or two to keep the lights on, please do. You can do so a couple different ways. You can do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can click on the little donate button at the bottom of the screen, and that goes through PayPal, or you can go through the Patreon, which is just patreon.com/NorseCode. It's a renewing thing. It's much like an NPR pledge drive or something, where you end up putting in a couple bucks and it ends up just charging that per month. So you guys are more than welcome to do that. We appreciate it. All of the money that is donated to us goes to either the costs for storage, for like network storage over the year, or for website, or for new equipment. We just upgraded Dusty's rig a little bit so it sounds better, and got a couple of different chords out of that. But anything that you donate to the show ends up helping the show. We are trying to keep this for you, and we appreciate any sort of help you end up giving us and helping us remain ad-free. And so we really appreciate it, and we get to talk about the NFC North champion, Minnesota Vikings. How does that sound?
That sounds phenomenal. I can't get over that in my head. I was kind of running around the house a little bit right after sort of the final whistle of the game, and my roommates, who they're not into football actually at all, not even as much as me, just kind of at all. They found it pretty amusing and somewhat alarming, but screw them. It was so great, and it feels I think a lot better than 2009. Which again, I'm so happy that we've gotten to the point where we don't have to say, well, in 2009, but it is a different team. The 2009 team was always borrowed, right? It wasn't just Brett Favre. It was, we had all of these old guys that we knew weren't going to last, 2 more seasons with the team. Kevin Williams, Jared Allen, Steve Hutchinson, that sort of thing.
Winfield too.
And this team, Winfield, right? And this is a whole breed of different, right? Everyone's young. The oldest pieces on the team. We know they're rentals, but they're also just not. They're not the kind of people who, if you got rid of them, the team would fall apart. And that's not an insult to Terrence Newman or anything like that. He's been playing, pretty well. Although we'll talk more specifically about his play in this game in a moment. But I mean, mean, this team isn't just good, and it didn't just win the NFC North. It's a threat to win the NFC North every year for at least the next 2-3 years, and probably more, given sort of the direction of the team and the head coach that the Vikings have.
Yeah, there's definitely a different feel around Eden Prairie and around Winter Park this January. We won, and not only did we win the NFC North, but we did it in prime time against a winning record team in Green Bay. We took it. We didn't just we didn't just win because they lost. We won because we won. Like that's the big thing. And that's the first time that we have that's the first time that all of the division rivals have blanked Green Bay in their own stadium since what, 1968?
Since 1968. There was a time after that where the Vikings, Lions, and Bears all beat them in Lambeau, but it was the NFC Central then, so the Bucks couldn't beat them, which not a huge surprise. But it's the first time since 1968 they were blanked out by all their divisional opponents, and even the bad '80s teams of Green Bay, didn't experience that kind of humiliation at home. So it was nice to cap that one off.
Boy, how would you feel if you were Jordy Nelson? And would you even walk in without talking about just getting a little bit more money? Like, no, I'm worth it. Did you see last year?
Yeah, I mean, it was probably more upsetting than it was uplifting for him to watch the loss, but it definitely sort of refocuses the value that he has to the team.
Disappointing all the way to the bank.
Players want to play and they don't want to see their teammates, screw up. But yeah, no, for sure, it solidifies the fact that he has an extraordinary amount of value to the team, and maybe it feels bad today, but it might feel good, later.
He might find some way of sleeping at night on top of his pile of money with many beautiful women, much like McBain. It's great. So let's talk about the game. Let's talk about the game that we won. Let's talk about Teddy Bridgewater for a moment. This was an interesting stat line for him. 10 for 19 for 99 yards, which I thought was a mistake. I actually pulled it up on 2 different websites just to make sure that the box score was correct. 99 yards, 10 for 19, not a lot of passing on this one, and the ones that he did throw were a little iffy. Justin Rubin, a reader, asks, why did Teddy poop the bed?
Yeah, no, statistically it doesn't look good, and I think from a film perspective that kind of backs it up. Most of the time I go on this show and I'm like, hey, so Teddy looked like he did poorly out there. If you take a look at the All-22, it's a lot more, whatever, excusable. It's a lot better. He actually played well, whatever. In this case, that isn't the case. And I don't think that surprises anyone. I don't think anyone is like, well, I guess from a different perspective. No, I mean, he played pretty poorly. Just a little bit over 5 yards an attempt. 52%, I think, completion rate, 1 interception, 0 touchdowns, whatever. But, I think that there were positive moments in the game. Again, not saying he played well at all. He obviously played poorly. And I think that one of the issues in the game, I think that he rushed himself. You can take a look at some of the good throws that he had in the game. I thought, his 8-yard pass to Jerick McKinnon over the middle of the field, that was probably representative of the kind of thing that you want to see from him, over the course of the season. Those are situations where he had his feet set, where his mechanics looked pretty good, where he read the field instantly. I mean, he got rid of the ball immediately. I mean, it was basically a 3-step drop. It was a spread formation. There was nobody in the backfield. Of course, it was Jerick McKinnon sort of out wide to the left, actually on the numbers. And, it was a pretty good route design. And so you wanted to see more of that, and you didn't. I mean, obviously we remember the 3 deep shots that didn't pan out, and we remember the interception. And he only had 19 attempts. That's 4 of the 19 attempts, and those were all objectively bad plays. Now, only 3 of them were bad plays by Teddy. I thought that the last sort of deep shot wasn't necessarily his fault. He hit it on target. I think it was Jarius Wright, or somebody didn't create enough space on the sideline, Yeah. And, it ended up being out of bounds, but if it wasn't out of bounds, it would have been a drop, right? So, okay. But with only 19 plays, if we know 3 of them off the top of our head are objectively bad, it takes a lot for him to have a good game. And it turns out he didn't have a good game. There are, some situations that might ameliorate that, but I didn't think the pass protection was as bad as it was in most games. And I thought that Norv did a pretty good job in making sure that, there were fewer instances where Teddy was exposed to pass rushers, fewer 7-step drops, stuff like that. He did a pretty good job making sure that, there are situations that advantaged Teddy in terms of pass protection. And I think that he just kind of hurried himself. I thought that, sometimes his mechanics were sloppy. I think on the overthrow to Pruitt, for example, I thought his mechanics, he leaned back a little bit, and I thought that, he didn't sort of center himself. Obviously, when he threw that interception, that was pretty bad. There wasn't mechanics is maybe the wrong word to even use in that situation. It was just a bad decision. But if you wanted to talk about mechanics, it was mechanically a bad throw because it was just kind of a Hail Mary lob, 8 yards forward.
There was nothing positive about what happened on that play. Like, he even made fun of himself on Twitter for it.
Yeah, that was funny. He subtweeted himself. But yeah, no. And honestly, that play was a terrible decision. But you have to give some credit to Micah Hyde.
What a catch!
That was astonishing.
What a catch! So yeah, I know a lot of people. I couldn't even believe, 6 people in the league that are defenders make that catch at that weird, awkward, that was the perfect placement for the perfect glove there was just so many things that went right for him at that one moment and so many things that went wrong for Teddy. Because if he misses that, we're not talking about it. We're just going, dude, what the hell? And moving on. But it turned into
exactly.
It turned
I know
into
some people were like, well, if that had worked out, you would have praised him. And it's like, wait, what kind of... No. That had worked out, it had been fluky. And I don't think that would have been praiseworthy. But B, I think in order to give someone the benefit of the doubt for their risky plays, they have to consistently produce more than they harm your team on those risky plays. And I think that Blake Bortles is almost there. Although, again, I think that, it's a bit overstated because, I think that he leads the league in negative big plays, so interceptions, fumbles, and sacks. I think he leads all quarterbacks in that. And the fact that I think he's second in touchdowns, is a good indication that, he takes big risks, and, sometimes that works out. But, I feel like, Blake Bortles and Ryan Fitzpatrick, the way that they take risks is not sustainable in a way that it, sort of is for, say, Brett Favre, right? Or, to some extent, Jameis Winston. It's just the risks that they take, I don't think are necessarily worth it. And I think that here with Teddy, until he takes more risks, and I kind of want him to, but until he takes more risks of kind of that caliber and it works out more often than it doesn't, I don't think you want to give him the benefit of the doubt. You can't say, well, if it had worked out, it would have been good, because we have no way of thinking that sort of process makes sense, because why would it work out? What has Teddy shown in the past that would work out? Yeah, he's made some shovel passes in the past, and some of them were kind of dangerous, but I don't think that they were that low probability in terms of success and that high probability in terms of massive negative failures.
Could that ball have hung in the air any longer? Like that?
Right. I mean, it was just, yeah. Yeah, so, there's a lot of bad decisions. There are also a lot of, small instances throughout the game where Teddy... I thought that Teddy, made decision-making errors or had the ball out late. There was even an instance where I wanted him to check out of a run, which is kind of funny because this is a debate I had in the Daily Norseman comments section about checking out of runs against run blitzes. And I think that, very often, run blitzes don't tend to impact the quarterback that much in terms of whether they should check out of something. It's only whether or not the numbers disagree. And there are instances where I thought the numbers actually disagreed and that Teddy should have checked out of a run because of that. He didn't do that. So, for example, I think even the very first Adrian Peterson run, I think, was to the left, and it was 3 blockers against 4 defenders. And actually, the reason that run failed actually had nothing to do with the math mismanagement. It was that Clemmings couldn't get to the second level and block Joe Thomas. So it's kind of funny that the reason that play failed isn't even the reason that Teddy screwed up. But I mean, it was just sort of all sorts of things. I don't know what happened, but his head was not in the right place. There were times when his mechanics weren't in the right place. There were some times when his mechanics looked nearly perfect. The first overthrow, it's kind of weird to say, his mechanics looked pretty good, but he got rid of the ball too early, so that led to an overthrow. He had a throw on the run where his mechanics looked absolutely perfect. But for the most part, his mechanics kind of broke down because he rushed his throws. He threw the ball a little bit too early, too often. And he just didn't seem himself. He didn't seem in his head. And I think that even in some blowouts, right, where Teddy puts up a terrible box score, I think like 38-7 against the last Seahawks team, I think, against the other Green Bay game. I just don't think I saw what I saw in this game from him. So if you wanted to call that fluke, you could call it fluky. If you wanted to say that he folds under pressure, which is like, I think the majority of the evidence says otherwise, you could say that. But I think that it's sort of one-off and more likely to be a fluke than it is like a representative of like a character flaw of Teddy from a quarterbacking perspective.
Boy, those overthrows, especially the reason why we can really pick them apart is because they happen on the first drive. And a couple of them would have clearly led to touchdowns. So Daily Vine Clips, who I thought was a spam account until they tweeted us a real question, gives the question, can you give examples of previous QBs who had a problem with overthrowing the football and became elite?
Yeah, so I don't remember. Well, first, we don't actually have an early career record of Rodgers because, he didn't really play early in his career. He started in the middle of his career. So you can't really talk about that. Drew Brees in San Diego actually did have a problem overthrowing the ball. In fact, if you look at the press clippings of Drew Brees, you take a look at some of the scouting reports people put out after his first year in the NFL. I think Jim Trotter at Sports Illustrated did a pretty good job of this. In fact, I even have an article where I take press clippings from Drew Brees' rookie and sophomore year and put them in. And basically, you have to guess whether or not it's about Teddy now or Drew Brees then. And you can't tell the difference. So Drew Brees actually had a lot of similar problems early in his career, and one of them was overthrowing. So Drew Brees is a good example. I thought Tom Brady was actually not that great on deep balls, early in his career. In fact, he wasn't even an elite quarterback until I want to say 2004. So after his second Super Bowl win, he actually was a good quarterback, which is kind of weird to say. But I thought he had some problems. I thought 2005 Tom Brady is kind of where it was really clear that he wasn't just a good quarterback or a great quarterback, but an elite quarterback. And then, of course, 2007, that thing. But I thought Tom Brady, I thought his deep balls were at issue. I thought that he, had overthrowing problems. And both Brees and Brady, when they were coming out, were criticized for their arm strength. They didn't have a very strong arm. Both of them strengthened their arms over the course of their career. Peyton Manning, who also, not many people know him as having a strong arm now, when he came out, his arm was strong enough, and I don't think there was a ton of criticism of that. I don't think, had that problem, nor Rivers didn't have that problem. Matt Ryan, I don't think, had that problem. Obviously, I've run out of elite quarterbacks. I'm just talking about, some quarterbacks.
And yet you completely ignore the elephant in the room of Joe Flacco, or you just answer the question of whether Flacco is elite. Awesome.
And then also Roethlisberger, who I think can be in the discussion at times. So I don't think he had that problem, but he also had Mike Wallace.
Yeah. So
Mike Wallace.
The overthrows on the first drive, the third one was definitely on. It felt like it was on Teddy anyway for placement. But can we talk about the throw to McKinnon for a moment and what went wrong on that play that clearly would have been a touchdown and just a punch in the face to any Packers fan?
I mean, I think he just got rid of the ball too early. I thought his mechanics were sound. I thought they did really relaxed motion. I thought the motion was fine. He obviously made the right read. I just thought he threw the ball too early and placed. I mean, he just put the ball in the wrong spot. Like, that sounds so reductive and simple to say, but there's no other. That's it. You just got rid of the ball too early or put the ball in the wrong spot. Because from the perspective of sort of during and before the process, everything was fine.
Let's talk about a pleasant surprise. Let's talk about Adam Thielen. Adam Game Changer Thielen, who had an amazing run on that fake punt to start the game. Like, how big was that play?
That was enormous, and I really like sort of the aggressiveness that the Vikings showed, throughout the drive, not just, the fake punt, but also they obviously took some deep shots too to try and take it to the Packers, who weren't expecting it, obviously. No, but that fake punt run was phenomenal. I think Locke checked to it because, they saw a tendency in special team scouting that the Packers tended to overload one side on punts. And when they did that, they checked to a run. So the Packers overloaded the right side from the Vikings perspective. And so the Vikings ran left. It's kind of as simple as that. But, someone had asked me, hey, did the Vikings line up kind of unusually? I thought even before the ball was snapped, I thought something unusual was going on. And I think the Vikings lined up normally, but they checked to it based off of what they saw against the Packers. So that was nice. Then obviously Thielen had, the sort of sweep that netted him some pretty significant rushing yards too. He had a great game, and then I think that he had a catch. I'm not looking at a stat line, but he has many rushing yards as Adrian Peterson.
Yep, tied AP for 67 yards rushing. It also helped that AP didn't have to do any serious work to get the rushing title. He had already won it by the time the game had started, so that was at least a little off his back. But Thielen was clearly important to the game, and it was funny. The mic'd up this week was Chad Greenway, and Greenway kept saying on the sidelines, "More Thielen! I want more Thielen! Give me more Thielen!" That's all right. Sure, if that's what Greenway wants, I feel like we should give him what he wants. I kind of want to see what we end up doing if we end up going back to Thielen and against Seattle or not. But it'd be it's interesting because we don't see him in trick plays nearly as often as we do somebody like Jerick McKinnon, right?
Yeah, and Cordero obviously. I think that was part of the reason it was successful.
That man should not be that man is not being spoken of yet. Cordero, he knows what he did. We are not discussing him yet.
We'll get to him. But yeah, no, I think that was part of the success that he was able to get on the trick play. I think that there's not really a Thielen out of the backfield play that was on the film until that game, which is pretty smart. I had been talking about last week how North put a bunch of wrinkles in the game that complicate your ability to scout, and then made the offense better. And I think that he should continue to do that, and he did continue to do that. So definitely credit to North Turner. I think these last 4 games have all been really, really big for North Turner. I think that Thielen's success in this last game is a really good example of that.
No one expects the white guy from Detroit Lakes. Nobody.
Nobody. This reminds me of the argument I had when Thielen, I think, first made the roster. He was over Rodney Smith. He's a 6'5" receiver. I think that he ran like a 4.5 or something. It was really fast for like a 220-pound dude. I think he's 223 pounds. So he's like 6'5", 223 pounds. Not very productive at Florida State, despite having great college quarterbacks, terrible NFL quarterbacks, Christian Ponder and EJ Manuel. And so, Rodney Smith didn't make the roster. Thielen made the roster. And, a bunch of people were like, what's the deal? And I was like, well, I expected Thielen to make the roster for Rodney Smith. He was better in camp and in the preseason. They're like, well, Rodney Smith is way more upside. Like, well, okay, so define upside. Is it because Rodney Smith is like literally just a larger person? Because Adam Thielen is 6'2", right? He's actually taller than Cordero Patterson, and everyone just kind of forgets that. And they were like, well, I mean, he's got more athletic talent. And I was like, in what dimension of athleticism? Because Thielen is faster. He runs a 4.42. I think at NFL Draft Scout they list him at 4.45. I think that's inaccurate. I think he ran a 4.42 at the regional combine. And he's got a pretty great vertical. I don't have it in front of me. He's at like 36 or 37. He's got a phenomenal 3-cone time. And so he's a really athletic dude, and people just couldn't grasp it because he's a white guy. And the fact that I think that his 40 time matches Jarius Wright's 40 time, 4.42, and they're both the slowest receivers on the roster based off of 40 times, and they're still in like the top 30% of receivers in terms of raw speed, much less sort of size adjusted speed. Thielen is a really athletic dude, and we saw that on both of those plays, and I think that people are finally getting it. It's weird, but yeah.
Can Detroit Lakes and Mankato finally put up their signs? Home of birthplace or home of Adam Thielen. I feel like it's time for the signs to come up. Well, Detroit
Lakes gets to say birthplace, but I think that Mankato gets to say home of.
Yeah, I think Detroit Lakes can do something along the lines of home of birthplace of WeFest and of Adam Thielen. Because
Oh my God!
two things. Those are the two things that people associate.
The two
Detroit
whitest
likes.
things to come out of Detroit likes. WeFest and Adam Thielen.
That's it's true. It's we're not no.
Well, it's certainly not an insult. Obviously, I love Adam Thielen.
Yeah, this is one of those Drew McGarry things. No one disputes this. Great. Next up on the offense is Adrian Peterson, who ended up going out of the game at one point with with what he was describing as back spasms. Ended up getting 67 yards. He did end up coming back. The thing I want to focus on is the fumble that happened during the game. Is that on Teddy, as it appeared to be bumbling out of his hands before it reached Adrian, or was Adrian in the wrong spot?
I mean, that's a pretty good question. I think it's a toss play, so I'm pretty confident, and we saw that from the replays that it looked like it was on Teddy. I'm pretty confident it was on Teddy, and it was kind of weird that the announcer mentioned the gloves. That obviously has nothing to do with it, you friggin' morons.
He had his own bingo card, and he was trying to stack it.
See, Teddy gloves. Oh, fantastic!
It's well known. It's well known that Al Michaels both gambles and mentions gambling on the air. So it's entirely possible that he has his own card in front of him. Like, okay, in the pool, I will get $50 more if I end up getting this other square.
But yeah, no, that was on Teddy. It looked like it was a short toss play. I don't think Peterson was in the wrong spot. It just slipped out of Teddy's hands. You could make the argument that Peterson was in the wrong spot and that Teddy expected to just hand it to him instead of toss it to him. But that's not what it looked like to me. And it doesn't look like anyone came out and said that. And I think Mike Zimmer probably would have said that if that were the case. And as of this recording, he hadn't said it in his Monday presser. He hadn't said it in the after game presser or whatever. So I think we can pretty safely say that was on Teddy.
It's just one of those bad luck things, but it turned into good fumble luck where Adrian ends up fighting for the ball. Like, no, I've seen what happens here. I'm going to get destroyed if I don't recover this. I have to get this now. He may have threatened to kill Clay Matthews in the pile there. We don't know the awful things that ended up getting said on the field there, but Adrian ended up taking the ball, and you could tell the look of relief in his eyes when he came up and went toward the huddle, like, oh God, okay, so second down, guys.
Yeah, it was a fumble for 0 yards, so 2nd and 10. I don't know. Didn't you see that commercial with Larry Fitzgerald in the middle of the pile? They're just cordial.
Oh, that's the right. They've been like that. They've been like that ever since the commercial started coming out. Oh, there was a time when it was not okay, but ever since the commercials for concussion came out, they've been much more. What's the word I'm looking for? Unless you're Odell Beckham Jr., people have been a lot more cordial, and it's like a version of our town down there. Just smiles and handshakes. That's right. On Norse Code, we get to
on the internet.
Yeah, on Norse Code, we reference terrible plays and musicals because that's what we're doing now. Or I'm just going to reference our town for no good reason. Good. Yeah. But AP didn't have a bad game necessarily, and he ended up getting 67 yards. But dude ended up out for at least a quarter, didn't he? And we ended up having Asiata out for a little bit, and then we had McKinnon. But McKinnon, after getting a couple of runs, didn't end up doing much in the way of offense. Though to be fair, in the fourth quarter, we barely had the ball.
Yeah, and I thought that. McKinnon, obviously, he did a pretty good job in the passing game, but in terms of, running the ball, he didn't get that much play. For the most part, I thought that he did an all right job. He had 3 runs for less than 3 yards and 2 runs for more. He had a 6-yard run, a 10-yard run, and I thought that he made a lot of the yardage on the 10-yard run. I think that the tackle for loss isn't really on him. So overall, I would say that this was a very positive game for McKinnon from a running perspective. As a pass catcher, I thought Jerick McKinnon did a pretty phenomenal job. Obviously, that overthrow would have changed things a little bit, but for the most part, He had a return for 24 yards. He was open deep. I thought that he had 3 targets in that game. I'm trying to remember now. No, he had 4 targets in the game, 3 receptions for 33 yards. So he was pretty good. He obviously didn't fill any hole left by Adrian Peterson, but Adrian Peterson was pretty up and down in that game anyway, which is kind of weird, right? Because you can say, hey, so Teddy only threw for 99 yards, Adrian Peterson only threw for 67 yards. Adrian Peterson was missing for almost 2 quarters of the game, and he only averaged 3.5 yards a rush when he was in the game. By the way, the Vikings win. So like it's kind of weird, but I thought for the most part the offense existed. Like I don't want to say that it did poorly because I thought that it did all right, but like clearly the primary movers in that offense didn't really showcase offensive talent.
It was just weird to watch from a certain respect because you're sitting there just going, wow, it seems like the Packers have the ball again and they're just not giving up the ball. Time of possession's got crazy.
Actually, so I was logging play-by-play recap of the game, and there's a moment where the Vikings don't get the ball. I think it's in the fourth quarter, actually. The Vikings don't get the ball for like 8 minutes in the fourth quarter. Some of that has to do with some pretty long drives, but it also has to do with that person that I suppose we're not allowed to talk about until a little bit later. But the Packers had the ball for quite a while. Some of that has to do with 3 and out. Some of that has to do with just the fact that the Vikings had some chunk plays that allowed them to do something and then went out. But I don't have the time of possession stat in front of me.
I do.
But it was pretty bad. What's the time of possession?
Time of possession. Minnesota, 24 minutes, 18 seconds. Green Bay, 35 minutes, 42 seconds. And there's why it felt like Green Bay was always on offense.
Yeah, they had the ball for, what is that, so 50% longer than the Vikings?
Yeah.
Nearly 50% longer.
Nearly 50% longer. So,
and that I think tired out the defense at the end too. So, time of possession normally to me is not a big deal as a stat. I think that it's way overrated as a stat. Here, I think it indicates something just because it provides explanatory power for why the defense kind of meh in the middle of the fourth.
Well, let's talk about defense. Let's talk about Everson Griffen being a disruptive force with 4 hits.
Woo!
Everson Griffen,
4 hits.
What a hell of a game he had.
Yeah, no, I was taking a look at him specifically when I was relooking at the all 22 because sometimes pass rushers, they get a bunch of pressures or hurries or even sacks, and then they're kind of a liability in the run game. I think late season or sort of not late season. Early and late career Jared Allen are probably pretty good examples of that, where they would get pressures and sacks, but they wouldn't be as disruptive in the run game as you'd hope. Obviously, mid-career Allen I thought was pretty good in all respects, but I thought Everson Griffen did not embody that. I thought that he did not just a great job as a pass rusher, but I thought he did a very good job, as a run defender. And sometimes he would assist on runs and he wouldn't get the tackle. But sometimes he would be pretty critical on some plays. So when Eddie Lacy ran for, I think, his first play with negative yardage, I thought Everson Griffen was key on that, and I don't think that he even touched Eddie Lacy. The fact that he walked back, Josh Sitton, one of the best guards in the NFL year to year to year to year. Obviously, he's playing left tackle, but he walked back a guy who's known for playing with power. He didn't, finesse him. He didn't, he just won with leverage and power. He pushed him back, and Eddie Lacy couldn't do anything. Anthony Barr attacked him, and Eddie Lacy, had to respond to the fact that he's being squeezed out by these 2 dudes. And then Eric Kendricks was able to clean it up for a loss. And I thought Everson Griffen was really important in the run game. I thought he probably had a couple of tackles for loss in there too. Because I remember he ran all the way across the backside of a play in order to tackle, I think it was James Starks. So he holistically, he had a great game, and I thought that he set the edge really well. I thought that he just beat the crap out of, quote unquote left tackle Josh Sitton.
Yeah, Sitton didn't have any answer for him. It was fun to watch. and we ended up getting 11 hits on Aaron Rodgers this game. Rodgers is. I noticed that his jersey was a little more green this game than last. He got harassed pretty nicely.
Yeah, he did. He did get a little bit. I suppose harassed is a word. Certainly, he needed to talk to the Vikings HR department afterwards.
Yeah. Other stuff that we should talk about includes the Captain Munnerlyn heads-up play, where it turned into a fumble. Was that Griffin who ended up knocking the ball out?
Yeah, that was one of Griffin's 2 sacks. Although it's always weird when a player barely or doesn't touch, the quarterback and then is awarded a sack. But because fumbles are also tackles, it's a sack, and I have no problem with counting that as a sack. But yeah, it was Everson Griffin who knocked the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands, and it was a fantastic no call from the refs, who I thought overall I thought the refs did an all right job in the game. I thought there was maybe 2 mistakes. And some people are like, well, Brian Robinson, he was being held the whole damn time, and fine, I get it, but for the most part, I thought the refs did a good job. I heard a lot of people who were at the game heard Packers fans complaining about the refs, which is, maybe that's an indication that I'm biased, or maybe it's an indication that, Packers fans are maybe a little bit more used to what happens on their home field. But yeah, I thought there was a great quote from Munnerlyn after the game about that fumble return, and he was like, because, he had that interception return that was nearly a pick six just a week before. And so in the run up to this week, he evidently kept telling himself, I'm going to take it to the house next time. I'm going to take it to the house. This week, I'm taking it to the house. And he did. It was a super heads up play from him. It was a phenomenal play by Griffin. It is a good example of what the defense was able to do. There's not one single play that I think captures how good the defense was, because they were so good in so many different aspects of the game. But that, I think, is one of the 3 plays you maybe want to show to highlight how good the defense was in that game.
It was a real good heads up play. Some teams really have a problem with playing till the whistle, and the Vikings did not have that problem at all this game. They were fighting for it even directly after the whistle blew. And it was a smart move to just keep going with it, and trying to make that a thing. There was the almost an interception or almost a fumble earlier in the game where the the receiver bobbled it and ended up on his elbow or forearm or something. Ended up making a catch, but really looked like a fumble. They kept playing through that regardless. So. No, it's good to see that sort of heads-up play for the Vikes. Other one we want to talk about is Xavier Rhodes with a huge pick on Aaron Rodgers. My question is, was that bad placement by Rodgers, or was that a great play by Xavier Rhodes?
Well, I think that sort of regardless, it was a very good play by Xavier Rhodes. But I think Rodgers definitely screwed that up more than Xavier Rhodes, won the play, as it were. I thought the broadcast actually did a pretty good job of explaining why. Rodgers threw it in when he should have thrown it out. I kind of want to know what happens if Rodgers does throw it to the right spot, because, Rhodes, he's just behind the receiver. It's not that he's out of position, and the person that he's throwing to, James Jones, I think there were 2 defenders in the area by the time of the throw. No, actually, I'm watching it right now. There's only one. I was mistaken because Barr had Kuhn. But if Rodgers throws it to the right spot, it's still probably a pass contested. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a pass defended, because James Jones has been, surprisingly good in those situations. But part of the reason that Rodgers threw the ball in the wrong spot, and it was just plain inaccurate, and he also threw it to the wrong side of the receiver. So it was a decision-making mistake and an accuracy mistake. I think that part of the reason he made that bad throw was actually that pressure was coming at him, and he had to throw maybe not necessarily entirely across his body. I mean, he wasn't, running sort of in the opposite direction. He ended up correcting himself, but he had to throw on the run, and he had to throw from a bad angle, and he had to throw sort of hurried because of the pressure. And that pressure was provided by Tom Johnson and I think Brian Robinson. And if not Robinson, then probably like Hunter or a blitzing linebacker. I thought that defensive line had a lot to do with why that was an interception. I thought that, Xavier Rhodes was generally in good position. I'm watching the play now. It was mostly Tom Johnson, but Sharif Floyd played a pretty big role. There's a lot to credit on that play, but you do want to say, hey, Aaron Rodgers screwed that up. Still, Xavier Rhodes' first interception of the season, second in his career. I don't know if this is going to be a renaissance for Rhodes, as it were, but it certainly is nice to see.
Well, he picked a hell of a time to have his second career interception. That's for damn sure. That worked out quite nicely for everybody involved. That was not on Green Bay.
Great timing.
Yeah. Other thing I wanted to mention was that we were really good at stopping them on third down. Historically, Green Bay has been terrible this year at third down conversions. They're actually 28th in the league. And this particular game, they were 2 for 15 on third down. They ended up converting on a couple of fourth downs, yes, but when it hit third down, when they needed to convert, 2 for 15 on third down. That is just not good.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think a big part of why the Vikings were so good on third down is it's kind of weird. It seems like the linebackers kind of rotated how good they were. So I remember I was complaining about the first drive by the linebacker, about the play from the linebackers. And I said Chad Greenway was the best performer on that first drive, and he had a missed tackle and a missed assignment. And so, I was obviously a little bit bitter. I rewatched it, and I thought Chad Greenway, not just the first drive, but I think through the second drive, I thought that he was playing pretty excellently. I think after that, he kind of dropped off. But that's okay, because I thought Eric Hendricks from then on played really, really well. And then Anthony Barr, I think, near the end of the game, was playing pretty phenomenally. So Eric Hendricks, I think, he played well for most of the game out of all the linebackers. But I think that Barr played a really excellent game at the end. I thought that Greenway helped set them up early on. I kind of wish Greenway kept up that level of play. But, I mean, obviously we all know my opinion on Greenway. And I think that overall on balance, he probably actually had a better game than I initially reacted to it. But that's not necessarily to be expected, but it's not entirely unexpected that over the course of the game, he didn't maintain sort of that excellent level of play. He wasn't necessarily the liability that I tend to treat him as. So I thought the linebackers played pretty well. I thought that the defensive line played pretty well. What's interesting is that Sharif Floyd is playing a lot better from the nose tackle position than I had anticipated. That first game that he played as the nose tackle, which I think, was Seattle, if I'm remembering correctly. He was awful. He was getting moved by Patrick Lewis and whatever guard was on the side. And after that, he's been playing pretty well. He's been able to get pressure through double teams. Tom Johnson, he had some struggles early in the year as a rotational defensive tackle. He's been playing well recently. He played well in this game. Obviously, Everson Griffin had a big game. Xavier Rhodes, he had an excellent game, not just that interception, but excellent coverage throughout the game. Harrison Smith is Harrison Smith. Sendejo had his problems, but, for the most part, that was covered up by the excellence of everywhere else. James Jones was a real problem, but he got kind of lucky because of drops or missed throws. And Terrence Newman, James Jones was a problem. Terrence Newman got kind of lucky against James Jones because of drops or inaccurate throws. And so that is something that Terrence Newman is going to have to fix because he got kind of worked. Hopefully he'll be better. He's struggled in the past 3 games, but he's had some good moments, and for most of the year he's been pretty excellent. So hopefully he'll fix that. But yeah, I think that's why they won on third down. I thought it was the excellent play of the linebackers. I thought obviously the defensive line played pretty well, and then the secondary was what we expect the secondary to be.
I'm finding myself hating Sendejo a lot less lately. Is that something that should continue, or is he just masking his play with a whole mess of tackles?
No, I think that he actually had a pretty bad game. I'm just not concerned with it because everyone else in the secondary played well. Plus, if the linebackers play well and 3 members of your 4-member secondary, or in this case, 4 out of the 5-member secondary because of how often nickel plays happen now. If they all play well, then it kind of masks things for the bad player. Now, Andrew Sendejo, I think he led the team in tackles this game.
Yep.
But I think most of them were probably assisted tackles or tackles that he wasn't sort of the primary mover on. And the play that sticks out to me was Eddie Lacy's first big run. A lot of mistakes, I think. All three linebackers made mistakes on that play. But, Lacy gets to, I guess you could say, the third level, but really it was the second level because the linebackers were all attacking the line of scrimmage. Lacy gets to the third level. He sees Sendejo, and he just runs right through him. And it isn't until, I think, Smith takes down Eddie Lacy that the play is over. Sendejo gets a tackle for that, right? But he didn't materially... I mean, he materially affected the play, but, like, I in my head, Eddie Lacy is running forever without Harrison Smith. He's running all the way to the end zone while Andrew Sendejo is, like, there for the ride. So yeah, he had a lot of tackles. I thought that he didn't play well, and I thought, there were some pretty big missed tackles too. So yeah, I think it's just easy to not care about Sendejo when everyone else on the defense is playing as well as they do.
Is there something that he could be doing, not necessarily better, but is there something that if he were to, say, listen to our show and pick up a tip or two, is there something that he should be doing more on the rush or on defending? Is there some part of his game that he could improve, like, pretty quickly?
Yeah, he needs to square up, wrap up, and hit lower. I think that, it's all fundamentals, and it's, like, really difficult to say this about a player who, he obviously knows, like, more about football, but he doesn't, consistently imply what he knows. But about a player who's been on the team for so long that, it's just like, you can't say learn to tackle. He obviously, like, knows how to tackle, but he's not doing it well.
Yeah, at that point, at this level, it's just a little more insulting. Like, why haven't you learned to tackle yet? How many years have you been in the league and no one has taught you how to tackle?
Right. I mean, like, he's not, he's not, like, bereft of that talent, but yeah, he needs to square up. He needs to attack the opposite hip. Which is what Mike Zimmer's been teaching, the entire defense in terms of tackling. You attack the outside hip. And he needs to hit a little bit lower. And safeties are often, and defensive backs are often taught to tackle high to prevent missed tackles and allow help to get to you. So I get maybe why he doesn't necessarily do that. But in this case, he should attack through the hip. And it's Eddie Lacy. He's an offensive lineman. So, maybe you attack like a DB instead of a linebacker. But that's what happens. Sometimes he didn't square up on those missed tackles. Sometimes he tackled too high, and sometimes he just didn't wrap up. And so that's the kind of thing that he needs to fix. He's been much more assignment sound, as of late. So that's nice. But he's got to get it done.
Yeah. So it's now time to discuss the player that is now going to be named Cordarrelle Patterson, and lots of Twitter hate on Flash this week. I wonder why. He had a great return marred by Mason Crosby, the kicker, knocked the ball out of his hands and causing the fumble. Green Bay recovers, and our already exhausted defense went right back out onto the field. And we had a couple questions on Cordarrelle Patterson. The first one is from Brad Tucker, who asks, are Patterson's returns/yards and 4 touchdowns, both best in the NFL since 2013, worth the 2 fumbles he has had this year?
Well, it kind of depends on the position of those fumbles, right? Fumbling at your opponent's 30, that's maybe more frustrating, but significantly less damaging. So in that context, absolutely. But I think that I think that in general, more touchdown, Jesus. I think that in general, probably not. I think turnovers are slightly worse than twice the value of touchdowns, because if you don't have a touchdown, especially on a return, you still have an opportunity to score. You still have possession. A turnover robs you of points. It robs you not only of your ability to score, but it gives them points. And so I think it's different than scoring on a return, because scoring, sort of the maximum outcome, right, is 6 points or 7 points if you want to count the extra point. But the maximum outcome for failing for a fumble is losing 6 points and giving 6 points to them, which I know, it sounds kind of like arbitrary and made up, but actually, if you do statistical testing on this sort of stuff, I think it bears out actually that turnovers are almost twice as bad, or more than twice as bad, generally speaking, than touchdowns. You take a look at how to weight quarterback statistics, for example, and if you test it for wins in games and against future games, usually wins in games, interceptions turn out to be more than twice as bad as touchdowns. So I think that no, it's not worth it generally, but in this case, it is. I think for the most part, Cordero Patterson in general, as a kick returner, is worth it. So there's that. There is another thing about Patterson that our next question alludes to.
But will Patterson smile while being cut? Asks Sean Smith.
I think Patterson's getting cut or anything. I think he's on contract for the next year. I think he's going to be here next year. Because if you have the best kick return in the NFL, and that's what the Vikings believe they have, with a pretty good, reason to believe it, then, you keep them all on the team. It's a marginal advantage that other teams just simply do not have. And you can be pretty special at it, especially because if you take from the last 12 weeks instead of, all 16 games, he's been astounding. He's been phenomenal as a kick returner. So it's probably going to get cut. The smiling thing, man, I do not like to think about or talk about players' moods after, when that sort of thing happens. And, I was pretty bitter about it on Twitter. But, when you think about it, it's sometimes it's just coping mechanisms. It's not that they don't necessarily feel bad if they're smiling, especially if a teammate is trying to cheer them up. Why is it a bad thing if that teammate succeeds or whatever? And we always talk about how players should have amnesia, right? They should forget immediately what that bad play is. That's a huge quality in quarterbacks, that after an interception, they kind of forget it. And then we get angry when they don't look sad, which, I think a lot of people know this. A lot of people act happy when they feel sad, especially when that sad thing just happens and people are like, well, are you all right? It's no, I'm great. I'm the best I've ever been. That just taught me a lesson. That's all. And I love learning, just kind of absurd stuff. And there's a really good example, I think. Derek Anderson, I think he was with the Cardinals at the time. They were getting blown out, and the sideline showed him laughing in response to a joke from a teammate. Yep, and the reporters are like, why were you laughing? And his first response was basically I wasn't laughing. What are you talking about? But he just goes on and he's like, no, screw you guys. I take this shit seriously. It's my job. And if I don't do my job, I lose my livelihood. I obviously take the stuff seriously. In fact, I probably take it more seriously than you do. And it's it's a much more heated rant than that. But that's probably pretty demonstrative of it. But when you combine it, right, with all the other stuff that we know about Cordero Patterson, I can see why people are, ticked off. And I'm not going to argue people, end over end that they shouldn't be ticked off. This is a guy that has always seemed, carefree, careless. And you combine that with hey, he didn't take up, the wide receiver mentor, who I already forgot who it was. Someone famous.
Michael Irvin?
I think it was Michael Irvin. That dude knows things about receiving.
He knows things about a lot of things. Receiving being one of them.
Some of those things maybe Patterson shouldn't learn. But Dallas was a pretty exciting time.
Sure was. How about this? He can stay on the team as long as he learns how to hold the ball correctly and protect it when a kicker is coming to strip the ball from you on their 30. Can we do that?
Yeah, that's embarrassing. That's just embarrassing.
Of all people, Mason Crosby. Really? Come on.
Well, Mason Crosby got in his head before too, right? Because that's when in the other game, that's when he got the taunting penalty. It was Mason Crosby that set him off.
What a prick. This all just revolves around the idea that Mason Crosby is just inside of Cordero Patterson's head. Next time they meet, they're going to see each other across the field, and they're just going to see They're going to see the little dust, not dust bunny, but they're going to see like the brush.
Like the tumbleweed roll
go across the 50.
It's the most hilarious thing, too, that Mason Crosby might be inside Cordell Patterson's head, because Patterson kind of owns the Packer special teams unit. And so it should be Patterson who's inside Crosby's head. But no, it's definitely the other way around.
Definitely. So, a couple of fun facts about this particular Vikings team now. We have 2 straight primetime wins. Take that, curse, against the Giants and against the Packers. So that it's not something you can shortchange. We won twice against teams in the primetime. Also, we won against an opponent that was over 500, which we have been mocked relentlessly on Twitter and on Reddit, that we can't beat teams that are over 500. Hey, guess what? We beat them. It's not like the Green Bay Packers were good this week, but still.
Right. It's like interesting because like people still deride the Vikings for for their opponents, but like at this point, the Vikings, according to I think Football Outsiders, have the 12th or 13th, I think 12th strongest schedule. They have a DVOA of 11, a weighted DVOA of 10. So, and they feel like a top 10 team to me. So, statistically, they're top 11 or top 10 according to that metric. They're a top 8 team according to strength of opponent adjusted point differential, because they've got plus 5.8 is their point differential after accounting for opponent strength, and that makes them a really good team even after, or definitely after, you account for their schedule. If you have the 12th strongest schedule in the NFL according to one relatively significant metric, and you have an 11-5 record, I mean, you're a good team. This is a good example of it, of course. But I mean, we saw in the Denver game and we saw in the Arizona game, both losses, right? But we saw in those 2 games that, the Vikings can sort of hold their own pretty spectacularly against some really, really good teams. And then we were able to see sort of the fruits of that at the very end of the season.
The next one, Teddy has not been defeated at Lambeau. Teddy Bridgewater is 1-0 at Lambeau. I like this stat. I think we should keep it going. I think we should see 2 and 3-0 instead. Yeah,
no, that'll be fun as it rolls through the years. Teddy owns the Packers in Green Bay.
Teddy currently owns Lambeau. That is Teddy's territory, even though he threw that god awful interception. Next up, again, this is the first time that the Green Bay Packers have been swept at home by the entire division since 1968. Just a terrible, terrible year for them. And the Vikings, this is a stat that you had put out on Twitter.
Relatively terrible, but yeah. I mean, they're in the playoffs.
They're in the playoffs, yeah. This is a stat you put out. Yeah, this is a stat you put out on Twitter. 3-0 in rematches this year, the Vikings. Which...
yeah, I mean, that's mostly a funny stat. But watch out, Seahawks.
Yeah, so we got the Seahawks coming to town on Sunday. We're 3-0 in rematches. We're just saying that the payback's coming.
Well, right, because what is it? 2 is a trend, 3 is a pattern, or something like that. Some awful low sample statistical whatever. Exactly. But yeah, no, it's probably, I mean, it has to be true now. I mean, obviously 2 of those games, were also after games that they had won, because they are 5-1 in the division. But still,
yeah,
3-0 in rematches.
I like that one. 3-0 in rematches, 2 straight primetime wins. We got things going. Good. Let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from a Twitter user named Ran Demos. That's a great name.
That's probably their real name, obviously.
That seems like a real name. There's lots of people out there named Ran. I don't know. Whenever I see that, for whatever reason, I feel like I should be forcing a trade to Oakland and hitting a traffic officer with my car.
It's just weird, and I think Demos is French for the moss. So,
the moss. Yeah. I thought it was French for complain about catering. Was that?
That's the third definition. It's slang.
Oh, that's the one in Urban Dictionary. Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Well, we'll move on. His real question is, will Rhett Ellison's injury force the Vikings to be more balanced on offense, meaning less running first? We didn't mention this in the recap. I wanted to save it for the mailbag. Rhett Ellison is going to be out until most likely training camp with a torn kneecap. Is that right?
Yeah, torn patellar tendon, which I think Vikings fans are a little bit more apprehensive about because they know about Greg Childs, who had a bilateral patellar tendon, which is both legs. And I mean, there's a whole host of things that are different about that than they are about a single patellar tendon. I think Mike Zimmer said something about 6 months. So, I mean, it's the possibility that he could get going, in mini camps before training camp starts, which would be nice. But yeah, to answer Rand's question, Rand Demos, I think that I think that there's some element of that. I think that the game script is going to be more definitive in terms of what the Vikings are going to do, whether or not they're going to run or pass. If they're behind, I think they're going to pass more. I think that if they're ahead, they're going to run more. And I think that, the scripted plays at the beginning, I think that the scripted plays, they may run a little bit less. But I think what happens instead is I think we're going to see more Zach Line on the field. I don't think that Zach Line is going to replace Red Ellison. I think they're just going to run different plays, but they're going to have a fullback on the field. I think Zach Line has improved over the last couple of weeks. He had some really great moments in his last game. He also had a bad moment or two, but he had some great moments in this last game, and I think that they're just more likely to run off of fullbacks. Obviously Patterson is a little bit more used to fullbacks now than he was at the beginning of his career. I think that we're going to see, Pruitt in for, a couple more snaps, but I think that the runs are not going to be two tight end sets as much anymore. I think that I want to say half of all the runs that the Vikings had. Now I looked this up for a piece that, actually in response to an email, it's going to end up, I think, in Darren Campbell's Kick-Ass blog. It's a Vikings blog. I love it. And if it's published by the time, the show is published, I'll throw it in the show notes. But I found out that Red Ellison is in all but 17 of the two tight ends. So about like 200 or so snaps of all the two tight end snaps that ended up being runs. And then half of all the running snaps were two tight end sets. So a quarter of all those were two tight end sets with Red Ellison. I think we're going to reduce the number of two tight end sets. And we're going to increase the number of one tight end sets. And sometimes that'll add Zach Line. Sometimes it won't. But I do think that there's going to be more spread concepts. I mean, we saw that in the last game where, Teddy was even an empty, which means Jerick McKinnon instead of Adrian Peterson, obviously. Yeah, I think I don't necessarily think this changes the run pass balance too much. Maybe slightly in favor of passing the ball, but I think it changes the personnel a lot. I think we're going to see more McKinnon, we're going to see more Line, and obviously we're going to see a little bit more Pruitt.
Next question is from Sean Smith, who asks, was the Vikings defense gassed at the end, or do you think the Packers found a hole on defense? I'm going to let Eric Thompson on Twitter answer this one. Because he had tweeted out, the Packers had the ball for 8:35 of the last 10 minutes of the game. And yet the Vikings did not give up the points to lose the game. 8:35 of the last 10 minutes. That's astounding.
Yeah. Thanks, Cordero. Yeah. I think Sean, I think that we answered that a little bit, but I think Eric did a phenomenal job answering that. With that fun stat.
Jeffrey McNamee asks, how do we keep AP and Teddy from getting the yips again?
I don't know. We don't. I mean, Patterson is Patterson, right? He had a huge fumbling problem at the beginning of this season and also the beginning of his career. In both of those cases, that kind of leveled out. So whatever. Teddy is young. And for the most part, he's really good under pressure. Hopefully he can figure it out. But I don't know. I don't know if the Vikings can do anything other than just give them time.
Zen Cubit asks, how do you keep your heart rate at safe levels during these games? I know what I do.
Absolutely do not.
Drinking will lower your blood pressure. Also, taking a beta blocker will help. I suggest metoprolol. A nice low-level beta blocker, which has many lovely side effects, including anxiety. It'll also lower your anxiety,
James? Too. Why would we want lowering anxiety?
Yes, lowering anxiety, and none of this high anxiety stuff. No.
Oh, okay. I was like, there's no way you'd risk the side effect of increasing your anxiety during a Vikings game. That makes sense.
No.
Norse Code does not have medical professionals on the show, and none of our advice should be construed as medical advice.
Exactly. Although the next question's pretty good. Racer K asks, how many days does James have to sleep on the couch after this victory?
Well, James, answer the question.
You know, the weird part is we were actually already arguing before the game started.
So, fantastic setup.
So no one has had to sleep on the couch as a result of the victory, but she had long since checked out of the game, deciding that the Vikings were going to end up winning it, and didn't even watch the last couple plays of the game. Just went upstairs like, nope, we're done here. I'm going home. So it's funny though, because the watching the game, we don't get a chance to watch Vikings-Packers games together a lot. Usually it involves work or something, or just schedules don't end up working out the way they do. And this being a Sunday night, on the night that we were having our kid's birthday party, it just worked out that, oh, hey, we can watch the game together after the party and everything. And there was a lot of barbs back and forth as a result, but no one's sleeping on the couch. But if we do end up meeting each other in the playoffs, if like the weirdest scenario happens where the Vikings and the Packers both win out, man, we better watch that game in public so that we can second guess ourselves and behave like humans in front of other people, because that would end poorly. Ugh.
I'm just surprised it's lasted this long. Not a knock on your relationship or your relationship skills, but I don't know. The Vikings and the Packers have kind of put a lot of strain on, sort of those enemy lines relationships.
They've broken better relationships than ours. Let's be clear.
Yeah, exactly.
But we can move
also
on.
Worse relationships, if my dating history is any indication.
Yeah. Christopher Wiley asks on Twitter, do Rodgers' struggles this season highlight how important it is, even for an elite QB, to have quality wide receivers?
I think it's pretty important. I'm one of those dudes who downplays the importance of wide receivers in general, just because they don't typically have a huge impact on defensive alignment. It's usually personnel. If you've got Randy Moss or Julio Jones, it changes things, obviously. But I don't think Jordy Nelson changes coverages in terms of like drawing defenders away. I don't think people tend to double Jordy Nelson all that much, in part because Rodgers is good at distributing the ball. But they tend to get the great wide receivers tend to get maybe on average 10 targets a game, and that's if they've got not a great core around them. And so they'll touch the ball maybe 8 times a game in a good situation, whereas running backs and quarterbacks touch the ball on every play, and they tend to be over half of action plays in terms of running and passing. And running backs, it depends on the system. Running backs will touch the ball anywhere between 8 to 30 times a game, and so they tend to be just more important than individual wide receivers, and I think that they tend to have a bigger impact on changing the defenses. But that's not to say that they are unimportant. And if you do not have any skill at wide receiver, like the 2011 Vikings or the 2013 Vikings, a lot of the Vikings teams didn't know how to skill wide receiver, and I think that this Packers team has specific skills in the wide receivers. I think that Randall Cobb is one of the better slot receivers in the NFL, but he's being asked to play outside. So he is not a good receiver. There's a lot of good receivers in the NFL, and so it's difficult to say Cobb is one of them when he plays on the outside. And that's affected Rodgers a lot, which is why he had to go to James Jones early in the season. And so if you don't have good receivers, you can't throw the kinds of passes that you can't throw the kinds of passes that you typically would be able to throw, even if you have an average receiver. If you throw, an anticipation route that requires that the receiver attack the ball, sometimes some of these, receivers that aren't very good won't be able to do it or won't do it, and they'll lose the ball. They'll create contested catches when they shouldn't, and they'll lose contested catches when they should win. I was talking about this either on this podcast or another podcast about Matt Harmon's work over at Backyard Banter. He works at NFL.com right now as a fantasy analyst, but he does a really great job with the receivers. Receivers tend to win contested catches about 70% of the time. They're not really 50-50 balls. If you have a bad contested catch receiver, which a lot of bad receivers often are, you can get significantly lower. You can go 50-50 or even all the way down to 30%. And contested catches are a big part of the game. They're not just 50-50 balls in the air. They're often slants too. And catches where defensive backs are doing a very good job of making it difficult for you to complete the pass. And you have to throw those. As a quarterback, you have to throw in situations where your receiver is more likely to win, but still has a very, very good likelihood of losing. And if you don't have a receiver that can do that, then you have significantly limited your passing options. You can't throw the ball. I mean, think about when Rodgers threw the ball to like Devonta Adams, I think it was like 17, 18 times in a game, and he came up with maybe 80 yards. Like, it's just, I mean, that was pathetic, and it hurt the team a lot. And so I think there's a point where if you have good enough receivers, the quarterback is more determinant of the things that you can do until you get to the Julio Jones level, and then above that, obviously like Randy Moss or Jerry Rice. But I think that between Julio Jones and an average receiver, I can't think of an average receiver off the top of my head. Maybe late season Stephon Diggs. No, Mike Wallace is not average. He's been playing worse than average. But how about late season Stephon Diggs? Between Stephon Diggs and Julio Jones, I think the quarterback is the bigger determinant. And then between Julio Jones and up, the receiver once more has an impact on changing the game. And then below, Stephon Diggs or whatever your average receiver comparison is, then the receivers start to hurt you again. So it's not linear, but it is important to have a crop of good or average receivers. And without it, it's pretty significantly a huge problem. And I think that Jordy Nelson exemplifies that.
He also provides a draft question of Doxson or Coleman.
Doxson, I think. I think that Coleman is really exciting, and he has much better stats. Not just because Doxson was injured partway through the year, but because of Baylor's offense. Obviously he was like hurt by the fact that they had to go to like the third quarterback or backup tight end or whoever. They had a Maryland situation where maybe they had a linebacker throwing the ball, but Coleman, I think he's had like something like 40 touchdowns or something. And you want that to repeat at the next level, but you always want to be a little bit careful about the kind of things that an offense like Baylor does. But in terms of the qualities that you want, I think that Corey Coleman can do what we want Kendall Wright to do in Tennessee or wherever he is now. And that's be a really, really phenomenally good number two. And I think that Corey Coleman can be one of the best in that role. And sometimes if you're really good at that kind of role, you could be a number one. You could be like Antonio Brown, right? But I think that for the most part, the element that the Vikings are missing is a Josh Doxson element. I think he's strong, he's big. And it's not just that. He knows how to win at the catch point. I mean, I think Jonathan Judage, he asked how many times they're going to say contested catch receiver over the course of this offseason. And it's going to be dozens and dozens of times. And Josh Doxson is a perfect example of the kind of element that the Vikings are missing, because you can throw to him in those contested catch situations, in slant routes that are going to be, where receivers lit up, or, in the air when you have to win a jump ball or whatever, right? And he wins those. And it's not just because he's big. He actually does have a little bit more to add to his frame. But he's strong. And he knows how to position himself. People like the announcers talk all the time about, well, Antonio Gates, he played basketball. He knows how to box out for a rebound. I mean, that's kind of what Josh Doxson actually does. And so that's why I like Doxson. And I think that Corey Coleman, his usage in the offense at Baylor, I mean, he basically runs three routes. He only runs routes on the left side of the field. He is one of the best college receivers in the NCAA right now. But I think that Doxson translates a lot better. I mean, he's inconsistent. Corey Coleman's inconsistent. You want a good blocking receiver with an offense like this. You want someone who is more likely to win contested catch situations. And I think that maybe the technique that Coleman uses isn't the best. But I mean, he's really good. And I'd probably be happy with either, but I'd rather have Doxson.
Cody Whittington asks, are you going to the game this weekend? So, Arif, are you going to the game this weekend?
Probably not.
Do you value your skin too much?
Well, I got some great gifts over the holidays that would maybe resolve some of those concerns, including some excellent gloves that have multiple layers. So I'll wear like 2 gloves. They gave me this lumberjack shirt. It's got like flannel. It's flannel on the outside. The inside, it's like this down wool, not down, obviously wool. It makes me look like fatter. It's great. It's super warm. I got too warm wearing it inside a cold house in New Hampshire. And obviously I've got my Viking sweatshirt. I know we've got a box of hand warmers at the house, like any real Minnesotan. I could probably live if I'm at the game, even if my face is going to be flayed from, my skin's going to be flayed from my face. You know what I mean? Even if I leave with half my skull missing, right? But I just don't really have the funds to do it. We're doing a house renovation. I've got to buy food, and I haven't paid my phone bill in like a month. So probably not going to go to the game. Unless, Logan, if you're listening, I totally would be willing to let you buy me tickets.
We are willing to let you buy us tickets for the game. We are totally willing for it. Actually, it's funny. I was going to be in Minneapolis this week. I had a training
Going
thing.
to be. What changed?
It ended up getting canceled, and they ended up rescheduling it. Some person dropped out, so a bunch of U of M people were going to be hanging out in Eden Prairie, and I was going to be in town on Sunday. And I was going to be in town early on Sunday. And my thought was, well, if the Vikings end up making the playoffs and they're home, and the game was on Sunday, I could feasibly go to that. And sadly, that's not going to end up being the case. And I'm kind of kicking myself now.
Everything went right for you except the last part.
Exactly, right? Like, I had even like bought tickets to go to a Wild game on like the 12th too. So I had to sell those too. So just didn't end up working out. I have to go to Fargo instead for a couple days, and that's just not an okay substitute. Fargo is not a Viking playoff game. I would have stomached it. I would have found some way of managing the cold, but nope.
Yeah, and for Vikings fans going to the game that do have a little bit of redneck, just remember, layers are more important than thick things. Thick things are not as warm as multiple layers.
And layers are more important than alcohol. Not by much.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but by a lot.
Yeah. Let's go to Jesse Silba, who asks, why didn't the Vikings run more of those shots to Jerick McKinnon, and can they be effective against Seattle?
I don't think they'll be nearly as effective, but I do think that they'll be effective. I mean, one of the reasons that, Jerick was open deep on that shot, and one of the reasons that Jerick got targeted 4 times in this game is because of the matchups. I mean, Joe Thomas, evidently a linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, and Clay Matthews, they're both the inside linebackers, are pretty bad at coverage. And Clay Matthews has been bad kind of all year at inside linebacker. And one of the reasons he's not good as an inside linebacker is because he's bad at coverage. We saw that throughout the course of the game. Maybe they should have tried one more shot, but I think Norv got gun shy. But also, I mean, like, part of the reason that worked, I think, is because they caught the Packers in the right formation and personnel and were able to create shifts that created good matchups and stuff like that. So maybe, you're not going to get that later in the game when they adjust. So that's probably a reason. The reason I think that this is probably not going to be as effective against Seattle is because their linebackers are pretty good in coverage. And if they don't, have a linebacker do it, they might have Cam Chancellor do it, who I hear is pretty good. So it's not going to be as effective, but they still should try to find ways to get Jerick into space and see if he'll be open. Just because, hey, Seattle's had an issue with the seam all year, and Jerick is well positioned to be the kind of guy that can attack the seam. So when you see zone coverage, maybe attack the seam between the cornerback and the safety deep, or attack the hole between the strong safety and the free safety. And Jerick is well positioned to do that. Kyle Rudolph is well positioned to do that. And I think that whichever one of the two they don't pick up on certain plays, maybe you could find ways open. So I don't think they'll be as effective, but I think they could be effective.
Next question is from Eric the Viking, who asks, why are we not running more of a slant game with our speed? We've talked about that Good a couple question, times, Eric. And in the beginning of the year too. Yeah.
Eric, your question is so good, I don't have an answer. I think that they should be doing it much more often. In fact, I think two of Jarek's, receptions, I think both of them were first downs. Two of them, I think, were on slants as a running back, right? Yeah, no, they should do it more often. One of the reasons that you would not do it is if maybe your receivers aren't great against contact when they get the ball. But even knowing that the receivers are not great at boxing out and winning against contact and all that, you should do it. I mean, you're right. The receivers have speed. We see it on these crossing routes where Mike Wallace gets the opportunity to play against a linebacker in zone coverage. And he gets, 10, 15 yards, sometimes 22 yards, right? Slants are not that different, except they happen earlier in the route, and you can turn up field. And it protects Teddy more. I mean, we talked about that. So, Eric, you're right. We should run them more often. The Vikings have speed at wide receiver. There's some weaknesses that prevent them from doing that, but I don't think those weaknesses are so significant that they shouldn't be doing it more often. So I don't have an answer for you, Eric. I asked the same question.
Next question is from Matt Murphy, who asks, do you think Norv has shown too many cards on his on potential gadget plays with McKinnon or Thielen?
Nope. I think that, first, there's so many gadget plays that you can run based off of the idea that you could run those previous gadget plays. I mean, we saw that a lot with Percy. There were a lot of gadget plays that they ran. And then we saw them build off of those gadget plays to create new ones for when the defense reacted to the one they saw on film. And so you could create, I mean, reverses are a really good example of that, but you could create, pop passes. You could read a play option pass. You could create packaged plays off of it. It could be the exact same play, except Teddy has a read on a linebacker or a defensive end. And if the defensive end acts to attack the gadget play, Teddy can pull up and throw a pass on a slant route, right? So I think that no. And I think that offensive coordinators that have the ability to develop wrinkles in the game consistently over the course of a couple of weeks, like Norv has been able to do in the past. I think that he did a really good job of that in Cleveland, despite how bad that offense was. He's done a pretty good job of that in San Diego. I think that you kind of don't really run out of ways to maximize the potential of that. One of my favorite plays with Percy Harvin actually was off of a jet sweep. It was basically a play action where Ponder would, Percy is in the same position that Thielen is. Not quite. I mean, Percy's running and Thielen was kind of just there. But he motions, it's a jet motion, and Ponder, hands it off to him, but it's a play action. So he pulls it back. The defense reacts to the play action part of it, and they stop tracking Percy, who no longer has the ball, and then they throw it to him, and he's got it in space. So those are like 2 or 3 of those changes, and then you can have like orbit motion, rocket motion, jet motion, fly motion, which they're all a little bit different, and they're all pretty cool. They could just watch a West Virginia game from 2-3 years ago with Tavon Austin and just copy down that playbook and just use that, and they wouldn't run out of gadgets. So I don't think they'll have that problem.
Chance Hoekstra asks, would you rather sign Alshon Jeffrey to a 2 to 3 year deal or trade for Josh Gordon if he's reinstated?
Oh my God, I would sign Alshon Jeffrey in a second. Are you kidding me? Yeah, he might be injured and unavailable, but Josh Gordon may never be in the league again. Also, Alshon Jeffrey does a better job of contested catches than Josh Gordon. That was maybe his one weakness as a receiver. So,
yeah, and ignoring all of the personal problems that Josh Gordon has and all.
Right. I mean, we had Jerome Simpson, right? Like,
yeah, we had a guy who mailed pot to himself. Like, we can handle personnel problems.
But yeah, I would much rather have Alshon.
All right. Eli Vorderbruggen asks, Brian Urlacher with hair or without hair? Why was this the world's biggest story on Twitter today? Was there nothing else that people wanted to talk about other than Brian Urlacher having hair plugs?
I mean, it is weird. I mean, it's kind of like iconic, right? Like, we're used to Brian. I mean, he was bald coming out of college. Or he's bald coming out of New Mexico, right? So it's like weird. As a recently shaved person, and by that I mean my head, I would say Brian Urlacher without hair, but it's his body. He can do what he wants.
He looks like George Costanza with the wig. I'm sorry. He looks like George Costanza wearing the wig. It's just not... No.
I saw that comparison on Twitter. It's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
He looks so generic with hair.
Yeah,
There's
without
just
hair, he's much more distinguished. Whenever I think of Urlacher, I'm gonna imagine Brian Urlacher taking off his helmet in the middle of winter, probably in Chicago, and steam rising from his bald
him
head.
resting off of his, yeah, exactly.
Like, that is Brian Urlacher to me. And if he's doing things that make him feel better about himself, then fine. Um, if he's guarding his manhood, good for him. But no, dude, just you're wasting a lot of money. He looked better bald. Not something that can be said all that often.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Let's go down to Missoula Mark's question, who asks, I'm concerned about Seattle's D-line. What can Norv do to help fix the O-line problems from the past game? Screens, crossers, short passing game to open up the run game? What would you draw up?
I would. So Seattle is kind of an interesting, nut to crack. It's an interesting problem, and I think that some of the things that they were bad at 2 years ago, they're good at now. And obviously 2 years ago they had a better overall defense. But the things that schematically were problems for them, bunch routes, for example, I think they're not as big a problem for them. But, I mentioned a little bit the kind of things that you can do. And I think that sort of the hole between the free safety and the strong safety in the middle of the field is something you want to attack. Sort of those in-breaking routes from tight ends and maybe slot receivers like Jarek or Jarius. Those would be great. I think the crossers are a good idea, but I'm a little bit more worried about the crossers in this game than I would be in most games, just because they've got such a great set of strong safeties and linebackers and coverage that sometimes those crossers can come back to hurt you. Even if a pass is completed, it could be for not as much as you had thought, because crossers often rely on yards after the catch, or you could injure a receiver just because of how hard they hit. So the crossers are not a bad idea. But I do think that, I like screens, especially if they're playing off coverage. They may play off coverage against Mike Wallace, for example, or in general, because, their scheme is kind of happy with off coverage. It's not that they always do it because they play a lot of press zone, but, you'll see it sometimes. And so, screens would be a decent idea in that situation. I think that running back screens are probably the best bet, more than wide receiver or tight end screens. The Vikings don't do it as often as I think that they probably could, but they were pretty successful early in the year. A short passing game is fine, and I think it's better against Seattle than it is against a lot of teams in terms of like opening things up. But I think that you're gonna have to take those deep shots. I think that Rudolph is probably going to have to be a target of one of those deep shots, and I think that you're just gonna have to see if you can do it. Obviously, decline it if the coverage is bad, and understand that Earl Thomas could be sort of anywhere on the field at the time. But I don't think that you want to exclusively rely on the short passing game.
The cops coming for you there?
Yeah, no, but I shook them.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure we didn't have to have a part 2 of the mailbag or something. The cops aren't coming for you.
Well, I do get one call. I might as well finish it from the cell, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So, next question is, how was Barr used in the first Seattle game before he was injured? Was he spying Wilson? I'm thinking that game would have been much different with Barr in the game. Curious what the original plan with Zimmer was.
He only played something like 12 snaps, I think, before he was injured or something like that. Maybe even less. So it's difficult to say, what his role was. I wouldn't be surprised, for example, and I haven't done a hugely deep look recently in the Seattle game. Wouldn't be surprised if he had a spy role, but my guess is he more likely was used sort of in his traditional role, just because, Russell Wilson is a phenomenal, runner. He's probably, the second or third best running quarterback in the NFL, or quarterback who can run, maybe, in the NFL in terms of his ability to damage you on the run. But, I mean, they do try to, damage you, with the matchups that they have on linebackers. Now it's significantly harder now, and it was, it's not like they had Jimmy Graham in that game, but it's significantly harder now with Kristen Michael instead of Thomas Rawls. But they will try to take advantage of any holes you have in coverage in the middle of the field. And I think that they want to put pressure on Wilson. And I think that the best way to put pressure is to do the things that the Vikings have been doing to get pressure. They did line up Barr in the A gap a couple of times. You've got, that young center, Patrick Lewis, who's been playing pretty well, but you can confuse him sometimes. And I think that, the game plan would have been much different. Zimmer's really good at forcing teams to check to screens on third down and bars are really a key part of that, and they couldn't really do that in this game. So, yeah, I think that maybe Barr's role would have been what his normal role is usually, and it's a pretty significant role because he can shut down screens while also forcing the offense to check 2 screens. So,
Ted Glover asks, is your head colder in the winter now that you've shaved it?
Yeah, significantly. It's actually noticeable, and I'm kind of annoyed, but it looks a lot better, and it's worth it.
His next question, is your face warmer with your beard?
Yeah, it's actually something I noticed in the summer. Not the difference in temperatures between a bearded face and a shaved face is smaller than the difference between a head of hair and no hair. Maybe it's because of what I'm used to, and I'm used to being both shaved and unshaved on my face, but not my head. But yeah, that's what's happening.
Dustin Redding, if you listen to the year-end show, which I suggest everyone do, if you listen to the podcast where the clip show where Arif and I are talking about rap songs, this next question's for you. Dustin Redding asks, is the diss track Future, who is Ciara's ex and baby daddy, dropped about Russell and Ciara, going to make him suck on Sunday?
It's interesting because I saw Twitter kind of talk about the diss track, but they didn't. They were mostly just disappointed about Kanye's track. And so there wasn't as much discussion about this as I thought. But remember, there's a Ciara curse against Seattle at the beginning of the year. I think this revives the curse. For sure. Of course, that presupposes that Russell would listen to it, maybe. And,
in between sips of nano-bubbled water?
Right.
No, I'm so by that rationale, because people were more interested in what Kanye did as opposed to Future, we could blame the Vikings' loss on Kanye West because of the track that he put out that everyone else was talking about. Therefore, Russell Wilson didn't get a chance to listen to because people were just busy talking about Kanye. So we could blame a Vikings loss on Kanye West. I am excited for Sunday.
It's whatever you need to look forward to, James.
This is gonna be great. Next question is from Judd Zolgad's Hoodie, who asks, would you rather fight a 10-foot Seahawk or 10 Lindsay MN sports size Seahawks? I feel like
that's
10 of her size Seahawks would be a lot worse. Like against, say, the two of us, that would end poorly for us.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that because functionally that's 30 feet of Seahawks, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean that's worse. And they're more plentiful. And I don't know if you can punch a Seahawk in the face. I mean,
you can try. I have a feeling that it would end up turning into one of those old Batman things where we're fighting back to back, and there's a lot of yellow screen with pow, zip, bang, and it ends up with both of us just getting our eyes pecked out. I feel like we'd have a much better chance against a 10-foot Seahawk.
Yeah.
Final question.
Trying to get under it or something.
Yeah. Final question from Judd Zolgad's Hoodie. Why do you guys hate Dusty O'Connell so much?
Oh, if I could only count the ways.
He knows what he did. He knows what he did.
And we still demand, and he still hasn't paid off in restitution. So
we're gonna hold that against him until and make him host podcasts in perpetuity until that is paid off. He knows what he did. Dusty's a good friend. He is a crazy human being who is disturbingly happy in his life right now, and as a result, I'm sick of it.
Oh, I resent him so much for that.
Oh God, I can't wait for him to just be like, I woke up and they were there again. Like I want that. I'm miserable. Why can't everybody else be miserable? Sort of thing. Note, if my girlfriend is listening, I am not miserable, but I just want that. I want that reaction. I just want that Al Bundy reaction of, yep, still here. Great. Good stuff. That is going to be it for the show. Now that I've sabotaged my relationship and need to start talking to a lawyer. Arif, anything to plug?
Nope.
Fantastic. If you would like to donate to the show, you can do so one of two different ways. You can go to NorseCodePodcast.com, go to the very bottom of the page, click on the donate button, and when you do so, it'll just take you through PayPal. You can donate whatever you'd like. We'd appreciate Tree Fitty if you could, and just help keep the lights on and keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. And you can also go through patreon.com/NorseCode. It is a site that will allow a NPR pledge drive sort of thing, where you end up becoming a sustaining member. Ends up being, you can do anywhere between $1 and however much you'd like to throw at us a month. If you see value in our show, please feel free to help us out and keep the lights on. We really do appreciate hearing from you guys. You can follow us on Twitter. You can follow the show's Twitter account, which I tend to run, at NorseCodeDN. You can follow Arif at ArifAsanaNFL. You can follow Dusty at Dusty O'Connell. I am at Big Mono. I've started tweeting a little more from my personal account again. And you can email the show at NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. I think that's a show. I think we got everything Green Bay out of our systems. We are the kings of the North as it is. We ended up taking the title from Green Bay in Green Bay, and we are NFC North champions. That feels good. That feels right. We have one more show this week. We have Dusty and Arif, who are going to preview our special playoff preview against the Seahawks. We'll be releasing that here shortly. So keep an eye out for that. You can subscribe on iTunes. You can listen to us on Stitcher. All sorts of ways. So, for Arif, for Dusty, for myself, thank you for listening, and our formula is this. Keep Teddy alive. And we'll see you with the Seattle game.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.